Welcome to Real Talk, Gen XY and Race in America. This is a virtual conversation between young women of color as they navigate through the emotional impact of systemic racism following recent racial injustices. This discussion is presented by Shades Magazine, celebrating all women of color, an online publication and information resource site, and it's sponsored by the Exceptional Women in Publishing, also known as EWIP. My name is Lindsay Ellis, and I'm a writer and a member of the EWIP Board of Directors. Before we get started, I'd like to get some housekeeping matters out of the way. One, our producer has muted your mic. However, if it's not, please be sure to mute your microphone, and any questions you may have for today's guest can be added to the Q&A queue in the tools bar and will be read by today's host. Please be sure to include your name, city, and affiliation if you choose. For those new to Zoom, you can find the tools bar at the top of your screen or hovering your mouse along the bottom of your screen. There you can find other tools, and you may be able to use those during today's talk. Feel free to disable your video if you so choose. If you have general comments or questions, you may place them in the chat room also found in the tools bar. We're recording today's session for viewing on the Shades website later. Okay, so now let's begin. I'd like to now turn it over to today's host and moderator. Sydney Clark, a New Orleans native, is a multimedia freelancer and current graduate student at the University of Maryland, College Park, studying multi-platform journalism. Sydney is also a contributing editor for Shades Magazine, who joined our team last October. Welcome, Sydney.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you so much for that introduction. Before we begin, we have to pay homage, a short homage and tribute to John Lewis, who unfortunately died last night after battling cancer. And we just want to take a quick moment of silence to honor him, his legacy, and everything that he did. He was a social justice warrior and a civil rights activist, a huge one at that. So we'll just take a moment of silence real quick, and then I'll follow up with a quote by him. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. Rest in power, John Lewis. We love you, and we're going to continue to shine your light and your love. All right, with that, I'm going to introduce the 5 ladies who I've asked to join me this morning. First, we have KAMRI, who's a morning reporter for 1011 Now News, based in Lincoln, Nebraska. We have Madison Hunt. She's a music journalist for TRAKLIFE Media Group, and she's based in the DMV area. That's DC, Maryland, Virginia. We have MIGNON, an imaging account manager for GE Healthcare, and she's based in Los Angeles. We have KERRI EBANKS, digital manager for Washington State Democrats in Seattle, Washington. And we have DOMINIQUE, who's an English teacher for Murphy High School in Mobile, Alabama. Welcome, ladies. Let's begin. All right, some more people are joining. Okay, so we're just going to open up with a mini icebreaker. So to all the panelists, list 3 words and then say them that describe how you're feeling right now in this present moment with everything that's going on. Just 3 words. And I'll call on KAMRI to begin. And you can have a few moments to think of your 3 words.
Okay. My first word is going to be driven. And I use that word because with everything going on right now, I feel like there's no time to sit back and just let it happen. So it's driving me to do things and stick up for what I know is right and speak up about things that maybe we didn't talk about before, but now the conversation needs to be had. The second word I would use would be exhausted. It gets tiring, especially when you're working in it every day between the pandemic and social injustices right now. It does get tiring. And the third word I'd use is, I'd say, I'll be typical, I'd say inspired, because we are seeing people stick up for things that they didn't stick up for before, and are being educated about things they weren't educated about, and that's inspiring to know that it's making a little bit of difference. It's opening other people's eyes to new things. So those are my 3 words.
Let's see. Y'all, we can go next with you.
So I would say my 3 words are, first, frustrated. I mean, how could we not be frustrated? Every time we open social media or turn on the news, it's another reason of why we're fighting so hard for what we want. You know, it's so hard to see the blatant racism every single day and to not be able to do something immediately. And it's just extremely frustrating. It's like we try to go step forward and change things, but when we look into the media, it seems like we're going like 2 steps back. So first word would be frustrated. My second word would be surprisingly hopeful. I went to a couple of protests following the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and I can tell you, while I was protesting and seeing so many people in one place fighting for one end goal, no matter the color, the age, the race, the religion, we were all together fighting for one cause. And to see that firsthand and to be involved in it was truly hopeful. I was like, okay, wow, people really do care. And my next word would be just confused. You know, it's like every day I'm like, okay, what's the next thing? We have, like KAMRI said, we got coronavirus, we have the protests, we have civil injustices just running rampant throughout the country, and then we have our president, or lack thereof. And it's just frustrating that that's all compounding every day. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's like a whirlwind. I can't really stay on track and really digest everything that's happening. So definitely frustrated, hopeful, and confused.
Thank you for sharing that. And KERRI, what about you? What are your 3 words?
Hey, so my 3 words are furious, activated, and inspired. So like, I think I say with everyone else that spoke before me, just saying that this is just one of the most trying times, especially for Gen X's, Gen Ys, and especially like myself, a millennial. Like, this is one of the most trying times that I've probably ever been through. So it's normal for me to feel a little furious because it's some things that I've never experienced. So it's okay for me to feel a little bit enraged, but I feel extremely activated by everything that's transpiring. My day-to-day work has always been in politics for about the past 2.5 years. But everything that has transpired has made me go within my day-to-day work and figure out exactly what we're doing to make a change, like in the smallest aspects, in the large scales of everything, you know, getting the right leaders elected, but like in the smallest aspects, like what should I tweet out today to make sure that people understand what needs to be brought to the forefront? So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And then Madison, will go to you.
My 3 words, I think I'm tired because we continue to have this conversation, and it's been sort of a generational curse where we see the younger generation having to continue to talk about racism within this country and to have these conversations with older people who have already gone through it and now see their children go through it. I think it's just a tiring conversation to have, but it's also necessary. I feel hopeful because, like Mignon said, I have been to numerous protests, and to see, you know, so many people across so many generations come together for a cause is really insightful and eye-opening, and it sees how much the world can come together in such darkness. Mm-hmm. And also love for my people, for my community. I know during these hard times, you know, it's always hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and to have this space where I'm open to having conversations with my peers and my uncles and my aunts, and to celebrate within our Blackness. I think Juneteenth was like a huge holiday for us because it celebrates who we are, how far we've come, and how far we have to go. So those are my 3 words.
Great, thank you for that. And then Dom, will wrap up with you for the first question.
Okay, so my first word would definitely be motivated. I'm motivated for change and motivated to educate and influence other people to see that there's a better way to do a lot of things and there's a better way for the world to operate. I will admit I'm beginning to feel a little bit numb because of everything that just keeps happening. And it's like, how many times do I have to post something on Facebook? How many times do I have to sign a petition for something to change? And you stated earlier, Sydney, that I'm a teacher and I teach at a predominantly Black high school. So I'm thinking like at any point in time, this could be one of my kids. Like I don't have any children yet, but I have 150 children if you want to look at it in the scope of being a teacher. And I'm like, how do I help them? How do I save them? How do I make sure they're not another George Floyd or someone whose life was taken away too early? And with that, I'm concerned. My third word would definitely be concerned. I'm concerned about the collective trauma of police brutality against African Americans. I'm concerned about the collective trauma of COVID, and it's even more concerning that it's all happening at one time. So with that, it's all about, where is our nation gonna go? Where can we go from here? And it's concerning to see what comes next. So that's exciting about the next election, because that's hopeful.
Awesome. And that kind of leads into my following question, which is, what is your view of the state of the country right now? And this can be in terms of politics, the fight for equality, religion, education, any of those topics that you feel comfortable talking about. And we can take a few moments to gather your thoughts if necessary.
I think for me, it's more of the country is in a state right now where the fear of the unknown is just crazy. It's, when is this going to stop? What's going to happen next? I think that was mentioned earlier. And not knowing if you're doing enough and to keep it going. Like when George Floyd first passed away, you had everybody, they were on it, they were doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now they're tired and they're getting a little bit laxy and more relaxed and not keeping it, you know, as driven as they should be. And I think when you sit back and really realize that, and it's kind of scary to say, it probably won't stop anytime soon. And I think knowing that is stopping people from continuing those efforts to make a true change. And then, like we said, we know that the coronavirus is affecting our people a lot more than it is others, because we don't have the same access to healthcare and insurance and different things like that, like other races do. And with that being said, I feel like the country as a whole is looking for the answer. And because you don't know what the answer is right now, it's causing everybody to be even more confused and just not knowing where to go, where to look, and how to get there.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else has some thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Cam. And that like confusion is just what's, I think, leading the country right now. People don't know where to look. People don't know what to do. So they're just following whatever is in front of them and just going with it, which is really scary. And that makes me think about the state of education right now. I know in Mobile County, the biggest school system in Alabama, we're not going back to school. So we're not going back to school in August. And when we start in September, we start September 1st online. So it makes me think, okay, like, what's education going to look like? Are these kids going to have what they need to be good thinkers and good critical thinkers that are going to help get people out of office that don't need to be there? Are they going to have like the thinking skills to be like, I don't like this, I can stand up for myself and defend myself in my arguments and my beliefs? And like, that's something I'm really, really concerned about. And then you kind of like how you stated, the lack of resources that especially our population has. So what's going to happen when parents have to go back to work? Right? They can't sit at home with their kids. And, you know, I have asthma, so I'm considered high risk. And I was like, you know, I don't know if I want to go back to school and be surrounded by all those kids. But I think about it, like, they probably need a teacher right now. They need that love right now, and they're not going to have it. They need that consistency somewhere. And so that's pretty scary for like our Gen Z kids and that upcoming generation. Their life is just going to be so unstable for so long. And like, how is that going to truly impact them?
That's awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Anyone else for that question?
Do you mind restating the question just so we know?
Of course. So the question is, what is your view of the state of the country right now? And this can be from a range of topics, from COVID, from healthcare, the fight for equality, politics, or company.
So I'll answer that for you too. My view of the country is that everyone is still living as an individualist in all aspects of like whatever you want to look at it, like whether it's COVID-19, whether it is education, whatever you want to look at, people have so much of a individualistic mentality that it is not, we're not seeing the equal wealth, like equally wealth spread out across the country. Like for example, I live in Seattle, and so I see a lot of tech stuff. And I guess a lot of people may think like, oh, everyone in Seattle must love Amazon. But it's not necessarily the case. Like what I've been able to see in terms of how everything is shaped, in terms of what tech organizations and tech companies are doing to the country, and how they're setting the stakes and the bar is really high in terms of, it starts with them basically paying people more, like extremely high. And so that starts bringing up the cost of living. And so no one here is going to say, well, what about the rest of the people? Well, they can just move to another part of town, or they can move out of town, right? Because like, that's the thing, like just push people out. And so I think that's my biggest fear, is that we'll keep living as individualists.
Awesome. Anyone else before I move on to the next question?
I think just to go off like everyone's point, you know, we're in a world right now where, you know, the world is waking up, and it's unfortunate that it had to take this long. And I think politically, socially, we're just realizing that within this community, there's so much work to be done, and not having this continuous conversation, I think, has made this time so vital. And specifically because there are so many with, you know, of course, who's running our country right now and his prophecies and the people who are standing behind him, you see that causing a really big shift and a rift within our country. And to have such, you know, left ideas, and while we're all trying to come together and focus on one cause, you know, you also see other groups coming together and talking about it for the first time. And I think because of everything that's going on with the pandemic, with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, you also see that within our own communities, we're now calling out things that should have been called out a long time ago, specifically when it comes to Black women. I'm super passionate about Breonna Taylor, and I don't think her conversation has been at the forefront of this climate at all. And to have someone who I look at as a sister, you know, who's not being shown in the media, who is not being talked about in communities within the Black community as well as others, you also realize that this conversation about Black women and the Black Lives Matter movement and trans women who are not being talked about is coming to life. And little by little, you see the value of Black women being degraded. And I think that's also a conversation that we're also waking up to. And I think specifically for all of us, we're all Black women in different industries, and having these conversations with our own companies and our coworkers, I think it's a time for us to start speaking up, to have that wake-up call that we've all needed. And because of who, like the uncertainty about our world and our country moving forward, it's just a really valuable time to continue to have this conversation.
That's awesome, thank you. My next question is, describe some observations or things that you've noticed at home. And this can be where you live, where you work, things that have caught your attention since the protests began. And what are some of those conversations that you've had with family, friends, or peers?
I'll start. So I'm in an interracial marriage, so my husband's white. So I live in Mobile, and his whole family's here. So our conversations have definitely changed, and I've noticed that they've been trying to educate themselves a lot more. And for that, like, I commend them. They've been asking me questions. They're like, what can I look at? What can I research? And no, I'm not their teacher, but the fact that they are so interested in what's going on and they want to help and they want to make that difference, has shown me a lot. And I've been seeing that on Facebook as well. When the protests really started, I made a post because the people that I saw like posting the most and the most fierce on Facebook were my white friends. And I was very shocked, I'm gonna be honest. I wasn't expecting that at all. And I was like, use your platform, use your voice, use what you have, use your privilege to make a difference. And I was, you know, pleasantly surprised. In the protest here in Mobile, I feel like they were peaceful, but, you know, the police did not respond the way I thought they would with tear gas and all that kind of stuff. When they used that on the crowds, I was very disappointed, especially with us having a Black chief of police. I felt like he would do more to help the movement, but that part I was disappointed. But how the community here has come together and created One Mobile and things like that, I was pleasantly surprised. And that's where I think like my hopefulness for this all comes from, is seeing people from all walks of life coming together for a single cause to improve the lives of all people. And it's really great.
Thanks for sharing that, Dom.
I can go next. So one of the observations that I've made, and it won't necessarily be from the home front, but from the work front, because Dominique brought it up, so it was top of mind. So one of the main observations I've made is just lack of knowledge, which was so mind-blowing to me. So many of my white colleagues would say, oh, well, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know you were experiencing that. Wow. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't know? What do you mean you didn't see all of the injustices happening in this country for centuries on end? And it's because of the lack of education on their point. And like, ignorance is truly bliss. And I've had several colleagues come to me and say, well, Mignon, how could I learn more? I'm like, well, you know, I could definitely be your history teacher, but that's not my responsibility. I've had to educate myself for years after years after years. And the education that I've received, I didn't get it in middle school or high school. I had to learn about the injustices faced to our people in college. You know, and that's so mind-blowing. I'm like, it's not my responsibility to teach you. You need to find out for yourself all of the things that have happened to our people, and just maybe you'll understand an ounce of what we go through. So just definitely the ignorance and lack of knowledge is something that I've observed that was pretty shocking to me. So yeah, that's my observation.
And Mignon, I have a follow-up question to your response. So me and Mignon are one of, best friends, and we have some of our other best friends in the chat as well. And I know one day you were talking about, weren't there some workshops that you participated in with your colleagues at work?
Yes.
Could you expand about those, please?
Yes, so going back to what I first mentioned about my 3 words, and one of them was hopeful, I've had several great conversations with colleagues surrounding race relations in this country. So I'm in the commercial leadership program, which is it's like 15 of us in the class that are around the same age, so in our 20s, and it's pretty much a mixed bunch, but it is predominantly white. And when all of the protests started, they wanted to have more conversations about diversity and inclusion. So I would be in a call and they really want to hear from us. What are we experiencing? And, I let them have it. I'm like, do your research slavery. Have you ever seen a picture of lynching? Please look it up and then let me know how you feel. And I'm like, the years and centuries of turmoil that we, the Black community, have experienced, that's on our backs. Every single day. I'm like, when I bring myself to work and I'm smiling and I'm having a good day, you don't understand what's going on behind me, And so I put it on myself to, when I was having those racial conversations with my peers, to make sure they fully understood our experiences as Black people, because you can work alongside somebody, but you really need to truly understand them before you can pass any sort of judgment, and I took it upon myself to really educate the people that I could on the matter.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anyone else would like to share?
So I'll share. Oh, go ahead, KAMRI.
No, you can go. I'll go after. You're fine.
Okay, so I just want to piggyback off what Mignon said. So I work in a predominantly white, not only white, predominantly white area, but a predominantly white office as well. And so when everything started transpiring, so prior to everything sort of transpiring, because I work in Democratic politics, it's easy for me to like bring a lot of this stuff to light. But so for example, one time I posted a photo of a lynching on our social media page, and all of our followers, who are mostly white liberals, were like, they reported the photo. And I was just like, I shared that with my boss. I was like, listen, everyone's on the timeline saying like, this photo is outrageous. And I'm like, you know what's outrageous? The fact that Black people actually got lynched and beaten. So we're gonna leave that on the timeline. Just want to let you know that white people are getting mad. And then fast forward to all of like the George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery, like all of this transpiring within the past few months. I started taking a forefront, and they also started taking a better push to bring these issues to light. But the thing that troubled me the most was just like, so we're going to talk about Ahmaud Arbery, but we're not going to make it a big deal to like post about the anniversary of like, about Trayvon's birthday, or like the anniversary of his death. It's like the issue that I'm getting like with a lot of white liberalism is that not only do we make it a big deal, but we don't make it a big deal until it's time to make it a big deal. And that's what's really driving our conversation. And then that's also the voice that's speaking over real Black voices. Let's not even forget that point. And so now with the Ahmaud Arbery and the George Floyd and everything that's been transpiring, I began in the beginning of that to like take a forefront of like messaging for the party and putting my input in a lot of what we put out there. But then I honestly took a seat back. I was like, listen, you have the framework. I don't have to sit up here and share my trauma every single day. So for starters, I didn't, when they were like, does anyone want to talk about this? I don't have to share this with the staff. Like we can share this during our like happy hours. Like we used to do like happy hours all the time, but we can do virtual happy hours if you want to. There are other staff members that I speak to like just by ourselves. But I gave them the framework in the beginning, and then I say like, okay, here's a framework, Lau. Like if you want to put out a short tweet or statement, you don't have to bother me, because I have to protect my peace at all costs. Mm-hmm. And that's been the main front of everything, like protecting my peace and picking and choosing how I let this impact me in my work life, because I have to go back and see it in my daily life. And I think that's very important too. Like you have to talk about this. I would oftentimes say just like they have to talk about this in their work life, but I log out and I'm afraid to go running in my park because I'm a Black woman. So that gives me like a double reason to be afraid of, right? Because I know that at the end of the day, it's like, I don't have any family out here. And so I have to text my siblings and say, hey, like I'm going to run in the park. Like it's, even though it's 5 minutes away from my house, like I shouldn't have that fear of saying like, you know, I need to like let people know where I'm going at all times. And that's something that they didn't understand. And so it wasn't like I used my energy to make them understand. I did give them like a whole list of things to like do for research for like Juneteenth and just in general. Just things that honestly have woken the trauma within me, right? Like things that make me remember the trauma and like that I've gone through. So for example, I don't know if you guys ever heard of it, but it's a podcast by The Atlantic called Floodlines. And it talks about just the Black New Orleans during Katrina. And so that is something that has woken a lot of different trauma in me. And so I share that with them because it's like, no, y'all should feel this trauma too. Like y'all should understand what actually has transpired with this country over the past 400 years, and how as a 25-year-old Black woman, like this stuff I've been seeing since my birth, right? This is something that has been really kicking in and kicking us hard, even since I was a little girl, and something that we didn't know all of what was transpiring. We didn't know what the outcome of what was transpiring would be, but we still carry that trauma. And so it's now time for people to feel, understand, and learn through the trauma that we've dealt with.
Awesome, thank you. I just want to give you a round of applause for that. I really, really love that. I want to protect my energy at all times. And the other thing I wrote down was, I don't have to share my trauma with you every day. So thank you for that, KERRI. And I know, KAMRI, you wanted to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I know we've been talking about being in the workplace, and for me, that's a big thing. I moved to Lincoln about a year ago, Lincoln, Nebraska, and it's about an hour away from Omaha. So Omaha is a very diverse city. It's a lot of Black people, but Lincoln doesn't have a lot of seen diversity. The diversity is here, but are we seen? No, there are a lot of immigrants that are here. And I talk about working at a news station. I am the only Black person in the building. I joke with people all the time because I'm like, the cleaning people, they're not Hispanic, they're not Black, they're white. And so with that being said, I mean, it was just a wake up call. I'm like, what? I've never really seen that before, you know? And all of the reporters here, we are pretty much in our 20s. We have anchors that are, you know, a little bit older and stuff like that. But when it came to the protests, we were covering it. That is our job. Our job is to inform people what is going on. Hey, I'm here. This is what it looks like. And I shared this at a rally I went to maybe a couple weeks ago. I had my anchor in my ear. He's like, hey, before we go back live, are you comfortable with me asking you on air live, how do you feel right now being a Black woman? This is at a protest. Behind me is the line of officers. And I'm standing there and I'm like, hell yeah, I'm about to answer this question. Excuse my French, but of course. And so, you know, he asked me, he said, unlike many people watching right now, you are a Black woman. How do you feel? And I told him, I said, I'm frustrated. I shouldn't have to be doing this when my grandma, who is in her 70s, was standing right here years ago doing the same thing. And so I speak about my grandma because actually for Juneteenth, she was asked to give a talk about Juneteenth on Juneteenth. And she called me up and she said, KAMRI, I don't know much about Juneteenth, and I'm frustrated that I don't know. And she said, because I never heard about this in school. She did her own research. My 70-year-old grandma got on the computer, looked up what she needed to look up, and she gave that talk. She was frustrated because she didn't learn about that. And for her to educate herself on that is the same thing that our white peers need to do. And I was happy on Juneteenth. I had my white coworkers ask me, KAMRI, can we come with you to this Juneteenth rally and celebration that you're going to? I said, yes, please come on. And I think right now, you're on the verge of you want to educate them because you want them to understand, but just like you guys have mentioned, you don't want to be what they depend on to get that education from. And I think there's a difference between educating yourself and, okay, like I said, just posting something, and educating yourself and really putting yourself in that person's shoes. I had a conversation with my producer the other day. He sent me something on Instagram and said he never knew that Black people had their white voice that they turn on, you know, when you answer the phone and you switch your voice up a little bit, then you talk right back with your friends. He didn't know that was a such thing. And he said, I hope you never had to do that with me. And I said, I didn't have to do it. Have I done it with you? And I, you know, going back to what KERRI said about posting on social media, every time I post a story about the Black Lives Matter movement and this and that, so much engagement, comments, reactions, shares, all of this. And you see the bad, but what I like is that you also see the good. You have a lot of white people who are out there defending those people that are still very ignorant and don't know what to say. And I had a post the other day. It wasn't a street sign, but a business out here in Lincoln had posted a huge, massive banner on the back of their building that said Black Lives Matter. You don't understand how many people said, oh, they put it on the back of the building because, you know, that's where Black people started from, was the back of the bus. The back of the building, you can see it from the college campus. You can see it from the busy streets. So because they put it on the back of the building, a lot more people can see it rather than them putting it on the front of their building. And it was just like those little bitty things. I'm like, how do you even get yourself to say those things in 2020, you know? And I just, sorry, that was a little mini rant that just felt so good to get all that off, but I think it's important for us who work in these environments, when you are the only Black person, you have to educate them, because they may read stuff online, but to hear it from someone who's experienced it or goes through it every single day, they need that. They do. You shouldn't be the only way they get the education, but you very well may help them see it in a way that they're not going to read it on the internet.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? And I have a quick question, Q&A from the chat. So
I have one thing to say to KAMRI. Well, two things. One, do not ever delete those comments. I love to leave all comments up there and just like let people see that, like people see who these people are. Like that's one. So yeah, that's it. But don't ever delete those comments.
Thanks, KERRI. Okay, to the panel. This is from Paul Dolphin. Hi, Mr. Paul, how are you? Are you confident that Gen Xers and Y Xers will turn out in large numbers to vote in November?
I guess I should start as the political party person. I am extremely confident. I think we understand we have no choice now. We were also beginning to be the biggest voting bloc in, thanks for the claps down. We have no choice now. We began to be the biggest voting bloc in 2016. And so a lot of people were still stuck on the idea of like what their parents think. And now we are old enough to see like what our parents may think might not be the best idea. I don't know about you guys, but I think I was 21 in 2016. And so that was when I for sure, like from my political views, I know that I for sure had my own political views like on a national scale, but I still used my mom as a large part of my understanding to understand the political scope of like what the local scale was. And I think that is very important to understand, that we need to use our own political interests and our own political understanding on all fronts, and not just the national front, and not just when we're voting for senators or only when our friends or family members are running. Like, it's important to make sure that we are researching not only just the people that are running, but we are researching the bills and the amendments that are on the ballot, and researching exactly how this is going to impact our community as a whole, from every level down to the school board, down to the executive party representatives, because those executive party representatives that you may see as like a small seat are the same people that give an endorsement for judges and senators and members of Congress to get larger seats. So everything really starts from the bottom up, and we can't think everything starts from the top down. Whereas if we vote for the right Democratic president or the right Republican president, I don't know what you guys side with, but we'll have that discussion later. But if you vote for the right Democratic president, you can't just automatically assume that that's going to trickle down into the right Democratic senator, because in Louisiana you have two Republican senators, right? So you can't think that it trickles down. You have to understand that it goes from the bottom up, and you have to understand that it goes from your community on up. And so when we talk about educating people, and when we talk about all of the resources that we want to give, I'd rather educate people more on politics than on race. Personally, that's just me, because of the trauma that it brings to me to educate people on race. But race still plays a huge role in politics. So you can easily always slide it in there. Race plays a role in everything, no matter what people say. But if you're going to ask me, what are you willing to educate people on today? I would say politics, because I can slide every single aspect factor of life. Because if I was an expert on education, I would still educate people on politics, right? Because education is a big fundamental basis of the political system. And the political system, the educational system strongly suffers if we are not educated on politics. Yeah.
And one thing I've learned in journalism school, especially in grad school, like I hated politics when I was in undergrad. I wanted to avoid it at all costs. I think 2016, I was either like a freshman or sophomore at Spring Hill.
You were a sophomore.
I was a sophomore. Thanks, KERRI. And I just remember like crying the next day, like watching Obama speech. And the election is on my birthday this year. And so my birthday wish is for all just to go out and vote. I don't care who you vote for. Well, I have some feelings, but like, I'm not gonna, we're still friends at the end of the day. But like, one thing I've learned in grad school is like, I have to, talk about politics no matter what. It's ingrained in pretty much everything. I understand that everything doesn't need to be politicized, but people don't understand that. They've politicized the coronavirus, they've politicized the Black Lives Matter movement. And so learning about politics, and like, some people are just obsessed with politics. I really truly will not understand it, but like, part of my duty as upcoming journalists and emerging journalists is to be in the know about everything that's going on in politics, no matter, if I feel this way about a certain person, like, and that's what I loved about my education at Spring Hill, is to be open-minded and engaging with people who have opposing views. So yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to expand on before we head back to the main questions? Oh, you got one question.
Well, I'm from the DMV area, so like DC is in the center of politics. And I remember a lot of my friends, I think their ideology behind voting was they felt that their vote didn't matter. And I think that's a really big conversation within the African-American community, especially when you see systematically that they've suppressed our votes. And being in DC and being at the heart of politics, having these continuous conversations, even when I was at the protests, there were people who had signs, come here, register to vote. So I think because the ripple effect that we've seen from this pandemic, from the last year's election to now with the protests, and feeling our voices now becoming valued, I hope and I pray that we are coming out and voting in November, because I believe that the Black vote will always matter. And I think because we have a vote and we have a voice and our lives matter, we have to go out there and be a part of the politics.
Awesome.
Oh, I was gonna add, so I truly believe that this generation will go out and vote. And I'm surrounded by 18-year-olds when school's in session almost every day. And kind of how when we started, they were like, yeah, I don't believe the way my parents believe. That is so true, especially in like the South, the deep South. You see how many of my students are like, I don't see how anybody could believe this way. And being in a predominantly African-American school, you see so many different types of relationships and bonds and friendships form that wouldn't happen 3 zip codes away, right? And so they're always like, okay, how do you register to vote, Ms. Howard? And I'm like, I know you can do it on Snapchat, so I like try to find a way to like relate to them. Like, you can get out there, you can have a voice. And just because I know like how much they care about each other. And that's something, KERRI, I think you were talking about how like individualistic our generation and like our society is. But I feel like with this upcoming generation, they care so much about the environment. They care so much about just how people are treated. And I think that's going to be the reason they go out, because they don't believe that some people are bad just because someone says they are. They're more interested in learning the truth about people than a lot of older generations are.
Thanks, Dom. And I also wanted to say this. When I was a senior in high school at Ursuline, and I don't know, KAMRI or Mignon, if you remember this, but in our civics class, our teacher, Ms. Cotrere, she did an activity where everyone had to open up their laptops and register to vote. That was for a grade. And ever since then, I've just been appreciative of that, because that was going into my freshman year of college, which was the big election. And so like, I just, appreciate everything that she's done in her civics class to make us feel like our voice matters. I don't know when I would be able to register to vote if I didn't do it in school. I think that was the perfect place to do it. So Alrighty, we have one question from the chat, and this is from Lisa Starnes, and she says, can anyone comment on mental health from provider and or consumer perspective as it relates to both race inequality and COVID?
So I am getting my master's in social work. So my internship, I actually serve as a therapist. And so the biggest thing that we learn as social workers going into the field is that people do not respond well to people that do not look like them. And if you look into mental health, there are so few Black therapists or Hispanic therapists or therapists of color or therapists that people can truly relate to. And before we got married, my mom told Sunny and I, go to couples therapy, get a realistic expectation of what marriage is going to be like. So I went on psychology.com and I was like, okay, let's find a therapist. And all I got was white men. And I was like, okay, Sunny, I don't think this is for me. And, you know, the only person that we could find was a white male. And I ended up just leaving the session like 6 times. I just got so fed up with how one-sided the conversation became. And I was like, I need somebody that's like me, that can relate to me. And like, that's the biggest problem, I think, with mental health. And then within the Black community, there is a stigma against mental health and going to get help. And I really feel like that should change, especially with what's going on right now during COVID. People need to go talk to someone. People need to go to a therapist, because this is just so much trauma at one time. And I work with teenagers at Bay Point Pediatric Psychiatric Hospital. And I do outpatient and inpatient, any type of therapy these kids want, I do it. And the biggest thing is, like, they don't feel like anybody understands them. And the reason they don't feel like anyone understands them is because some people just don't understand themselves or why they are the way they are. And as the world is going how it is, people need to have someone that they feel safe talking to. And I feel like I make a difference at the hospital because most of the kids that come and get outpatient therapy that I work with are Black. And every other therapist in that office, other than one, is a white middle-aged lady, right? And they don't feel comfortable talking to them because there's no way they can understand how I feel, right? And so if I were to talk about it and how consumers relate to mental health, we need to do a better job of making it more diverse and encouraging people to go into those fields of mental health. No, you don't have to necessarily become the psychiatrist. Sometimes you just really need to become a great psychologist or a great therapist or a great social worker, and you'll make such a big difference in people's lives, and you'll impact their lives every single day. And so that's my TED Talk on becoming a mental health professional. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Anyone else before we move on?
I was actually at a protest one day, not covering it, just out there going. And, you know, they were asking people, hey, have you registered to vote? Have you signed this petition? And then there were maybe about 3 people handing out flyers for free therapy. And on the flyer listed, hey, if you've experienced trauma or racial injustice, sexual identity problems, anything kind of being affected with right now, come and see us and we're gonna give you free therapy sessions. So as a journalist, I saw that as a story. So I'm like, let me go grab this story with this therapist. So I called them up, scheduled the interview, go and do the story. The woman who I'm speaking to, she is a Black curly-haired cutie, and she is a therapist. Then the owner of the therapy office, I think she was maybe half white, half Hispanic. And I talked to both of them, and every single bitty thing you just said, Dominique, is exactly what she told me. And when you think about it, when you go into a therapy session, and let's say this is your first therapy session, they're going to ask you maybe a little bit about your background, whatever it may be. And you don't want to have to start from day one and explain every little bitty thing that happened. And so with that being said, just like you said, you don't want to explain your problems to somebody who doesn't look like you because they're not going to understand it. And I think for us, I love God. I do. I pray every day. And I have a relationship with God. But people, and especially of the older generation, will use that and make you feel like, okay, you need to pray about it. You need to pray about it. Go to God about it. Yes. But after I go to God about it, I'm going to go see a therapist. And that is totally A-okay to do so. Because at the end of the day, yes, you can talk to God. Yes, God will give you answers. God will reveal things to you that will help you in your situation. But at the same time, getting professional help is a whole nother thing than praying about it. And I feel like that part, especially when it trickles down from our older generation, that needs to be explored a lot more. And I think a lot of people, especially Black women, will say, you know, we're strong. I can handle this. I'll get over it. You may get over it by yourself. You might, but it'll be a struggle. And if you talk to somebody, that struggle may not be as bad with you getting through it. And I think we take a lot of things on our backs and on our shoulders that we convince ourselves that I can get through this by myself. And I think when we get rid of that idea and, you know, explore the thing of not just talking to your friends about it, because just like Sid said, I have plenty of friends on this phone call right now, but I feel like certain things, maybe your friends did not experience that, but someone who went to school to learn how to help you through these situations may be able to open up your mind in a different solution than what you were thinking about before. And certain things that you may go through between coronavirus, between everything else, the person who may be your go-to to talk about it may not know what to tell you and know what to say. So getting that professional help, and I think having these conversations about everything I just mentioned, it needs to happen, and it needs to happen a lot more. And people need to understand that it is okay to reach out, not just to your pastor and to your best friends, but to a doctor when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Thank you, KAMRI. And we have another question in the chat, but I'm going to hold.
Can I talk about the therapy thing really quickly?
Of course.
So just as because I've heard other people talk about it, and I just want to go talk on it as someone who actually like goes to a therapist and has started therapy recently, mainly because of the racial trauma. So I just want to like acknowledge and say this here, as I say everywhere, mental health and like therapy and counseling, it should be a right and not a privilege. I stand in a realm of privilege, being able to afford therapy that is covered by my insurance, and it's like just $20 like on, you know, and copay on my end, and that it should not be the case. Like, I am appreciative of the help that I receive, but there are so many people that need this help now more than ever before, right? There are so many people that need this help that should get this help as free of charge. And there should be something that stands in place, like Medicaid and Medicare, like something in there that says that they can get this free of charge, just to start with. Like, that's just to start with. That wouldn't even be the end of it, talking about healthcare. But I just wanted to acknowledge that, and acknowledge exactly everything that KAMRI said. And everything that Dominique said. Like, I've been fortunate to be able to find a Black woman who is out in Seattle, my area, but she's originally from the DMV area. So she's been in and out and around the way, and understands, like, I don't have to go to every meeting with like a historic background of like why I could feel the way I could feel. I tell her how I feel, and then she comes up with like historical facts and says like, yeah, I would imagine why you feel like that, because this has happened, this, that, and many times before, as we have seen. But I just want everyone to get from this conversation that mental health and therapy should be a right, and it should be a right more so for kids and more so for teenagers than anyone. If we start anywhere, we need to start at a younger age, because I continuously go back to the idea of like Katrina, and what we all probably have gone through as babies, like what I went through as a 10-year-old, just being the constant transitions through the year of like 2005. There is no child that should have gone through that and not been able to come on the other side of that without talking to someone. And I'm okay. I know I'm good, right? Because I've had parents that have just held my hand and walked me through those processes. But like, I can't even tell my mom that I'm going to a therapist. I have to say career coach, right? So I'm good, right? But it's just, I just want everyone to get from this that therapy it should be a right and not a privilege. That's it.
Thank you, KERRI. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was awesome.
Can I
Anyone else?
Oh, yeah. So I've been in therapy since I was 13. So what KERRI just said, I think resonates with me very well because I remember growing up, I went to a predominantly white school, and those racial scars that I've gotten from that, having a therapist helped me form the Black woman that I am today, because without that stability of being able to talk to someone, and at the time my therapist was Black, she was a Black woman, I love her to death. But I would also like to say that I believe Dominique was saying this, and so was KAMRI, that there aren't enough Black therapists, like psychologists, and growing up, the trauma that I've received by having a white therapist, because you have to figure out who to talk to, what you can say. I remember having this conversation about the N-word, and she just couldn't resonate with that and that trauma that comes with it. And having those conversations and not being able to relate to your therapist is also traumatic. And I also want people to be very aware of that, you know, not being able to speak your truth by being a Black woman within this country. And we're fighting so many battles at a time, you know, not having someone to be able to resonate with those struggles and to help you in the long run is also traumatic. So I think it's a needed and necessary profession that a lot more Black women, I believe, should go into, because the stigmatization that Black women are strong and that we're enough and that we don't need anybody else, that is a conversation that needs to be addressed, because we can't carry the weight of the world on our backs. And not having that conversation, not being able to talk to someone about that, specifically when it comes to like classism, colorism, systematic racism within our country, you know, and sexism, most importantly. I think therapy, specifically for Black women, is crucial. I think it's necessary. I think it's something that should be addressed, because we need somebody to talk to. It can't just be our friends, and it can't just be our mom, because she also has the traumatic experiences as well that probably has been passed down that you also don't realize. And then now that's within you and you have no one to speak to, and your friends can't help you. So I think having the necessary resources within the mental health industry is crucial for Black women and also Black men. And I think starting it at a young age shouldn't be the stigmatization of, oh, well, they're not okay or they need help. It shouldn't be that. It should be an ongoing conversation that's natural within the Black community.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Madison. Go ahead, Mignon.
Okay, so I want to bring it back historically as to why it's so important for us as Black people to have mental health. So I wrote this research paper in college, and I really explored like the Black problem and the root of it and how we're going to overcome it together. And when I started off the paper, I'm like, okay, well, why are we so frustrated right now? What is the root of our anger, or why are we so behind? Of course, it's because of, you know, slavery and all the other injustices that happened to us. But when you think about it, we were dehumanized when we were slaves. We were told we were less than an animal, 3/5 of a person. And if you go your whole life with your entire heritage ripped from you, your name, your food, your family, everything is stripped from you to your just the bare bones, and everything that you used to know, all of your culture is just completely wiped away from you. You go on thinking that you're worthless, okay? And that's how we were for about 300 years in slavery. We were worthless, we were less than. And then all of a sudden they were like, okay, you're free. Walk off the plantation and go figure it out. How does that even work? It's ingrained in your mind that you're less than a human, and then you want us to go out into the world and act as if, you know, nothing's happened. There's no way that we could continue to function properly, because those chains of oppression that were physically shackled to us are still trapped in our minds, because we're still thinking, okay, we got to find our worth. We have to prove ourselves. There was no reparations done to the minds of the freed slaves. They were still in that mindset once they were free. And that has carried on for generations and generations and generations. And we're still seeing it now. In order for us to free ourselves, we have to take care of our minds. That is the thing that was broken in the first place. Did you know the ratio to slaves and slave owners? It was 1 slave owner to around 100 slaves. How are you going to control them? Break down their minds so that they can only rely on you. Our minds were broken hundreds of years ago, and we are still dealing with those effects today. And I feel like that narrative, that story, our history needs to be put at the forefront of why mental health is so important in the Black community. And then we talk about being a Black woman and how tough it is. I remember earlier this year, I had an episode, okay, to say the least. I was so frustrated. I felt like the world was on my shoulders. I was like, okay, you know, I have a great job. I'm starting to make money. I got to pull my family up. Or this person's doing this. I got to pull them up. I have to pull everybody up since I'm up now. And it was frustrating. I was exhausted. I sat down. I was like, I can't do it. There's no way I can do it. There's just so much happening around me, and I put so much pressure on myself as a Black woman, and I just broke down. You know, I have to be the strongest person. I can't cry. I have to be the best person in the office because people are rooting against me just because I'm Black. You know, we put so much pressure on myself, and when it finally boiled up and came to a head, I was with my roommates who are white, and I was like confiding in them. I'm like, you just don't get it. You don't get the pressure that I have to put on myself every single day, that all of our mothers have put on themselves to continue every single day. I'm like, that's being a Black woman. You have to carry everybody up to the top with you, and you can't cry, you can't show fear, and you can't stagger yourself. You just have to be strong. And we need to change that narrative because it's pretty damn exhausting, to say the least. You know, I've talked to my friends and I've talked to KAMRI, and it's like, girl, we got to actually feel our emotions. We have to embrace how we feel. We can't just continue to be this strong pillar for everybody but our damn selves, you know? We put everybody before ourselves, and it's starting to tear us down mentally. And it's time for us to change that narrative and keep going. Black women, yes, we're super women, but shit, we're I'm getting too comfortable. But, you know, we're strong, but we're still human at the end of the day. And I believe everybody needs to realize that.
Yes.
So,
I have one little bitty thing that I want to add to that, because I think we need to have a conversation with our Black men about what we're talking about, because just like Mignon said, we take it all up on us, and they have a problem when they see the Black woman cry. She is not responsible for holding everybody else up, just like you said. And I'm not gonna get into it, but I had someone come to me and say that her boyfriend was literally upset that she was crying, and asked her, why the hell are you crying? I'm sorry. Last time I checked, I was human and I was allowed to cry. Especially when traumatic things happen, you shouldn't be questioned why you're crying or why you're shutting down. And I think when Black men start to finally understand that it's okay for Black women to feel human, then that's when the change is going to happen. But if Black men do not get this conversation had between their friends and their peers and things like that, it's not going to change. And it's not going to change within Black women until Black men do that. And I mean, the whole mental health with Black men is a whole nother conversation as well. But I think with us as Black women and breaking down that we need to be strong and things like that, especially as being a mother, as being a grandmother, you're looked at as, I think about it when it's mom's birthday or when a mom passes away or whatever. What do you say? She was the strongest woman I know. She is the strongest woman I know. That's always, always a thing. And it's okay if she's not in everybody's eyes. But I think the most important thing is to have our Black men have this conversation and have it be brought to them that it doesn't have to be the Black woman that holds it all together. It doesn't have to be the Black man. Nobody has to hold it all together. And I think when Mignon's saying everything that she just said, it just needs to happen. The conversation needs to happen. And that's where the change will come from. Okay, that's it.
So Cindy, can I say two things? And I promise it's just two and I'll be done. So one thing is like Mion, you really touched on this, and there is one word, well, one phrase that I want to throw in there. It's post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so I want to throw that in there because I've always tried to figure out, why am I feeling this or why am I feeling that? And so it is very, very important that you deeply understand that what you're feeling sometimes may not be something of your life, but maybe something from a past life. And so we have to not internalize and say like, well, this is something that I brought on to myself, but it's just like feelings that we carry from our ancestors, maybe from a past life. And I want to talk on the idea of like, we don't have to hold all of this trauma within ourselves as well. Like, it's time for white people to start taking more accountability just for what has transpired. And a lot of white people will say that, oh, this is not my responsibility because it's something that my ancestors did, right? It's something that they did and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, it's not your responsibility that they did it. It's your responsibility that you keep letting it happen and it's continuing to happen, right? So I think that's a main thing. Like, it's not, the blame is really not all on us. And all on our own mental state and how we deal with it. It's time for people to say like, okay, we can take responsibility into shaping it and into making things better. And just one example, like my brother didn't want to he didn't want to ask the question in the chat, but he did want me to mention how you have protests and then you have people sitting just outside at lunch in the middle of protests, right? And that's something that is just the contradicting narrative of what America is like right now. And it's time for people to say like, well, I'm not going to take responsibility for the past, but I'm going to take responsibility as I've played out in this narrative nowadays. And so one thing that I talked about with another friend is just when we're walking around and we see people eating at restaurants, I'm like, why do these people want to eat at restaurants? I was like, they just miss the idea of other people serving them. And it's like, we can get into the idea of like how all of this is playing out within us in terms of classism and in terms of capitalism, but it's time for people to take that responsibility. So thanks.
Thanks, KERRI. I want to move on to the two questions we have in the chat. So this one comes from Lindsay Smith. Hey, Lynn. And she says, any comments on Black women not receiving necessary care in hospitals, especially during childbirth? The recent story on Shaija, Washington, a 26-year-old Black woman died during an emergency C-section. If I can get maybe one or two people to comment on that.
Okay, so
go ahead, Dominique.
So this is one of the biggest things that we learned in medical social work is learning how to advocate for your clients and advocating for yourself. And we had to watch this like three video segment on YouTube. And I had just got married at that time. Our dads were in cahoots about their little wedding speeches, and they're like, okay, now give us a grandbaby, which is problematic. But we'll go, that's a different thing on feminism and everything like that. But I remember watching this as like, I will never have a child here in America. And that is so heartbreaking because and I tell my husband all the time, oh, give me a baby, I want a baby, whatever. But it's like, I'm so afraid to have a child and have to go through the actual act of having a child here because my chances of dying in childbirth is so much higher than any other population. And it doesn't make sense to be this like first world country that loves to say that they're back-to-back world champs and they're so great, but you're failing on the most basic thing of childbirth, right? And it's so avoidable. And I was talking to my sister-in-law because she just had a baby and my sister's pregnant right now. And I was like, what do I need to know? Right? What can I tell my sister? She's like, make sure there's somebody in there with her because there's so many things that doctors will do that they know they're not supposed to do. And she said, if there's no one in there to watch out for her, she's like, that's a scary situation. And my sister might be having her baby during this whole COVID crisis. So it's like my sister has to extra educate herself now because she might be in there alone. And that's even scarier, right? And it's just the idea that people know that they're doing wrong and continue to do it anyway, or they don't take because the idea that Black women are so strong that, or Black women in the medical field, they say that, Black women are just dramatic, right? No, we're not. If I say I'm in pain, I'm in pain. Like, you need to listen to me. I'm saying this because I mean it. or that we can hope we can tolerate a lot more. Like, that shouldn't be how it is. And there have been so many studies of even people in medical school that say that they do practice with racial bias. And that's so wrong and so scary. And their licensure should be taken away because that's not how you should treat people. And that's another TED Talk for me. So I'll stop.
Thank you. All right, Mignano, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I would like to say it's absolutely terrifying if you look into the numbers of the disparities between races in childbirth. So I believe Black women are 3 times, could be more, or 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. So if you look at the numbers, they're pretty similar or worse than third world countries of our birth mortality rate for Black women in America. That is so scary. Like, I'm terrified I'm already terrified to have a kid. That just seems intense. And then to do it in America where it's proven, statistically proven, that I might die because of it, something that should be, you know, a routine type of situation. I mean, hey, we've been doing it for centuries. Why can't we get it right? You know, it's absolutely terrifying. And I always remember this and I'll never forget it. Shout out to my mom. She said childbirth is like having 1 foot in the grave and the other foot on a banana peel. You know, your chances are slim. You know, it's like you're either gonna die or have the chance of slipping and falling and then dying. You know, it's absolutely terrifying. And it's like, what do I do? How do I combat that? You know, I want to be able to go into a sterile, safe environment with professionals. But I mean, at this point, I'm like, should I have my child at home? Geez, like, I'm just too afraid, you know, and I'm afraid to go through the pain at home. But then at the same time, I'm afraid of dying in a hospital. And we shouldn't have to make that decision. As Black women, that question shouldn't be on the forefront of our minds, or should I have a child because I might die? Mm-hmm. I don't think white women are thinking that. I don't think so. I don't think they have to question whether they'll live or die, or whether their children will have equal rights and opportunities once they're born into this country. They don't have to think about that, but we do. So that adds to the layers and layers upon layers of things that we have to deal with, especially as Black women. We're expected, like we said, expected to be the strongest people on this planet. That's why this is happening to us, because they're like, oh, you can handle it. You're a Black woman. You're strong. You can have a baby and not die. You're good. I don't have to give you painkillers. That is not the case. We've got to debunk the narrative, you know? We've got to do something about this. What's the answer? I'm not sure, but I'm in healthcare, so I'll try my damnedest to figure it out. So, yeah.
We appreciate everyone, especially you that's in healthcare, you know, up and rising. And I know you're going to be a great healthcare worker in the near future. You already are, but you're on your way to the top. So I just want to do a little PSA. So we are going to go on a little further until like 12:45 Central Time. If people want to stay on, we're having a great conversation. I would like to continue it. And with that being said, if anyone else wants to comment on that question before we move on to the other Q&A in the chat, please do so at this time.
I can comment and just talk about all of the things that we are seeing in terms of like that's being brought to light in terms of like Black women dying during childbirth solely stems from the fact that our bodies have been on the chopping block since the beginning of time. So God, yeah, I was about to forget her name, but we think about women like Henrietta, right? And just things like that. And then, God, please forgive me, y'all. If you know, I don't know exactly how to pronounce these names, but I think it's like Sargiti. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, I'm sorry, but it's just referencing the fact that Black women, wait, go ahead, Mia.
Could you share the story of Henrietta Lacks for people who don't already know?
Oh, okay. So Henrietta Lacks was basically the mother of all of us. Johns Hopkins used her cells when she went in for medical reasons. And basically there has been, like, since they've used her cells, I don't know the exact year. I mean, Jan, if you know the exact years and stuff, you can go ahead and share it. You can share it real quick.
I'm not sure of the exact years, but I believe she was going in for like a cervical biopsy. So they took a biopsy of her cervix and then used those cells to perform medical tests and procedures for years to come. And they divided those cells and used them for more experiments. So without her permission, they collected her cells and mutated them, or like, of course they mutated them, but they recreated them for several experiments on today. That lineage of cells that they took from way back when in the early 1900s, they're still using today, those replicated cells, without her permission.
Yeah, and so that's just a simple story of Henrietta Lacks, but it just goes back to the fact that we never really had our bodies as for ourselves. And so now it's like a feeling that we are taking ownership over our bodies, and the fact that our bodies have been put on the chopping block, literally like dissected so that people can use for medical examining. And also, like, I just want to piggyback back off of like what Mian said, of course, like people don't understand, like Black women, as we talked about earlier in our discussion, we are often said to like be strong and you know, make sure that, you know, you don't need to cry, or like Black women as seen as the strong woman, and as the strongest of us all, right? Like even stronger than Black men. But because of that, we are not also, our pain isn't taken seriously. Because I like to always reference like just who I am as like a monotone person, because I had like dealt with pain easily. It's oftentimes strange for me to like just talk to doctors about simple things and just say like, well, this is hurting me or that's hurting me. And it's like, I have to literally put on a facade. I have to put on like a fake like just some fake over-exaggerated form of like pain, because yes, I can tolerate pain, but if I show them that I also can tolerate pain, they won't believe that I'm in pain, right? And so it's like, I just wanted to like just piggyback off of the fact that that's all where that is centered. It's like just us not really having our bodies for ourselves, and people and medical examiners always taking our bodies as something that they can just play and toss around with.
Learn something new every day. Thank you so much for sharing that, KERRI. And then I want to move on to our other question that we have in the chat. And this is from Janice Lee. Hi, Miss Janice. Should we be advocating for newsrooms to have people of color cover stories of people of color, women to cover stories of women, etc.?
Sid, you kind of cut out a little bit. Can you repeat the question?
Of course. This is from Janice Lee. Should we be advocating for newsrooms to have people of color cover stories of people of color and women to cover stories of women, etc.?
Okay, so, all right, so I go back to the protests, and I go back, actually, let's fast forward a little bit after the protests to more of different things happening surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, anytime I heard about something happening in the community, it was not my responsibility, but my desire to go and cover it myself. I want to cover it because I know how it should be covered, how the story should be shown, which parts of the interview should probably be used, how, you know, I know from the aspects of how this person would like the story to be portrayed. And I think when you have white reporters and white anchors give stories or show stories, they may not know those certain things. And I think as a journalist, you have a right not to show the story in the way that you want it to be shown, but show the story for what it really means and the facts of the story. And when you do a story, let's say based off of in the community, for example, I did a story with a historic Black church that they have here in Lincoln. And then when you have that white reporter, and I'm gonna lower my voice because I don't know who's in here right now. When you have that white reporter cover that story, she's not going to tell it the same. And it's not her fault that she's not going to tell it the same, but she just doesn't know. So I think we need to have it less put on the Black reporters and less Black anchors as the responsibility. But hey, if you want to cover this story, cover it. If you want to go along with this reporter to make sure she covers it right, that should be a thing that's okay. And I think when you have, let's say if you have a white male, an anchor, and he shares a story about a Black woman who lost her son to gun violence. He's going to tell that story in the facts. He's going to use what the police told him to break down that story and say, hey, this is what it is. He's also going to share with what that Black mom said in her interview. He's going to share that part. And I think it's more of, I go back to the leadership in the newsroom. Majority of the time in a newsroom, you're going to have a white male as the news director. And so a lot of people are like, why didn't the media cover this? Why didn't we do that? Did the news director know about it? Because the news director is the one who tells the reporters, or let me not say tells the reporters what stories to cover, but approves the stories that are covered. And then if the news director doesn't know about it, or a viewer doesn't call the station, or you don't send us an email, or you don't let somebody know, we're not going to know that it's going on. So let's go back to the leadership in the newsroom, is that's what you have. And then people, I don't think people understand that this whole idea of this thing called the media, it's not a thing. You have reporters that are in these little small towns who report on what's going on in their community. And then you have affiliates such as CBS, NBC, Fox, whatever. Different affiliates are led by different people, and you're going to be able to tell the difference on how they tell their stories depending on that affiliate. And then you look at, let's just take CNN, for example. CNN is going to have those headlines that are going to say what they want them to say. They may not always say the facts of what's going on. They're going to adjust them in the way that they want it to be portrayed. That's why when people think the media, the first thing they think about is CNN, and that is not what the media is. And I think it's important to have people who are not Black, who are not women, cover those stories. You need them to cover those stories because they need to be on the forefront, seeing what's going on in the community. When I think about what a journalist is, a lot of people think it as somebody who wakes up, puts makeup on, and reads. That's not what they are. A journalist is someone who's going to go out, they're going to find their stories. They're not going to wait for someone to give it to them. They're going to find it. And after they find those stories, they're going to find the people to talk to who are, dealing with what's going on in the community. And once we do all of that, that goes back to a lot, guys. That even goes back to, for example, like I said, I'm the only Black one here at the station. When it comes to the lights that are in the studio, those lights are adjusted for them. Those lights are not adjusted for me. When I look at certain things that I cover in the studio, I'm like, I look so dull, and I'll put my highlight on today, my eyeshadow was popping, and you can't even tell because the lights are not fit for me. They're fit for Brad and so forth. And so, sorry, I probably just went on another tangent, but there's a lot of little bitty things that goes on within news that people do not realize goes on. So when you hear people say, and I'm sorry, but I get so frustrated when I hear people say, the media is not covering this. Tell them about it, and majority of the times they're going to cover. We're looking for new things to cover. We are tired of saying coronavirus. We are tired of saying the same things over and over again, but if we don't find those stories or don't know what's going on, we can't cover it. And I think that goes back to, just people in the community and everyday people letting those media outlets know what's going on. Call up your local newsroom. You can type it in, newsroom number for, Chicago. You're gonna find a number. Call them, email them, let them know that it's going on so those stories can be covered. But back to the original question, I think it's important that you have those people of color and women cover those stories because they may shed a light on it to viewers that they may not even have known about that before. I have plenty of viewers that email me and say, hey, I really love the story that you did this morning. I had no clue about that. Well, now you know about it because I just told you. But then I think on the other spectrum of it, you have to have people that don't look like them cover those stories so they can educate themselves about it and want to cover future stories about things that they didn't know about before, if that makes sense.
Sharing. That was awesome, KAMRI. Anyone else want to talk about? Yes, Madison, go ahead.
Oh, well, just based on my experience, I work within the music industry. So I work for a ton of publications. So it's kind of it's a little bit different considering what I've been mostly writing about is a predominantly Black community. And in regards to like specific genres with like rap or R&B, some of it is a slippery slope within the music industry when it comes to, you know, should Black women be reporting about Black women music, and vice versa with Black men, because Ashley Westerman, she's from NPR. She's an Asian American woman who reports on Asian American issues, and she resonates with that so crucially. And I think it brings out the best stories because she's directly related to it. But within my industry, you know, sometimes it's hard for Black women to just talk about Black artists, because then that becomes, well, she can only talk about Black music. And then that becomes the slippery slope that not a lot of people want to address. Well, she can talk about country music, but they don't want her to, because that ideology, like she has to talk about music that she can directly relate to. And I think it is important within my industry because I can talk about any music. Love country music, I love pop music, I love R&B, neo-soul, anything like that. But within the music industry, specifically with music journalists and female music journalists, you have to be able to do that. And like that objectivity, you have to talk to your editors and say, I can write about anything. You don't have to just put me in one category. But in different newsrooms, it's different. Yes, I believe that we should all be able to write about whatever we want, but at the same time, do I like writing more about R&B than I do country? Of course. I love me some Jill Scott and Erykah Badu, you know, don't get me wrong. But I'm saying, you know, you have to make sure when you're in these newsrooms, I know it's very uncomfortable for Black women to put yourself in those positions where you may be scrutinized because of what you want. And it's something that's uncomfortable to talk about because those newsrooms are predominantly white and they're run by white male officials. But at the same time, if we don't start having those uncomfortable conversations with those editors, being able to say, I can do whatever, I can be in whatever position I want, it allows the journalists who come in, other Black women, to be able to say the same thing. And I think that's what's crucial within these newsrooms, especially within like my own specific company. You know, they put me anywhere, but you know, for the next person coming in, they may not be able to say that. And having that uncomfortable conversation with my editor, I think was crucial in how I position myself. So now I have a wide genre of music in my back pedal that people can say, oh, well, she can do all of this. So it depends on, from my own personal experience, what industry you're in. I'm in the industry where, you know, they want different perspectives. It brings music to a new level and it opens people's eyes to have like these new ideas, inventive ideas, especially with music coming up and emerging artists. But I think it just depends on, you know, being able to say what you want within this industry. And I know that's hard for Black women because we're always demeaned and we're always pushed to the side. And then we're only getting those side jobs when we should be getting the main ones. So I think it's a slippery slope, but Ashley Westerman always told me, she's one of my mentors, you know, she says, you write the best stories about the ones that directly affect you and that are personal for you. And I think that's crucial when you talk about the world around us and how it relates to whatever industry that you're in. So it's a slippery slope, but it just really depends on the conversation you're willing to have.
Thank you so much, Madison, for sharing that. That was great. Anyone else before I move on to our list of questions? All righty, let's go. All right, so my next question is, have you had any personal experiences with racism? And can you share any racial microaggressions that you might have experienced in your life?
Yes. I just want to tap it. Make sure I got it. So I actually told my coworkers about this yesterday. So let me pull it up. Something happened to me yesterday. Somebody made a racist comment on this ad that I was on. Let me pull it up. Oh, where is it? Okay. Okay, so this is me when I graduated from Loyola, and this is an ad that they use on Instagram. And as you can see, I'm wearing a kente cloth stole. Okay, we're all familiar with that. But let me read you the comment that someone left on the photo. It was a white woman who claims she's from New Orleans. So this lady said, please, I grew up in New Orleans, born and raised. The African stole around her neck, ... please. This is not, in all caps, this is not an ad for Xavier University. Yes, I went to Loyola University, which is a PWI, a predominantly white institution. It is not an HBCU. However, I'm an African American who worked tirelessly for 4 years to earn a degree in pre-med biology. Okay? I earned that African stole because I am an African American who's a part of the Black Student Union at Loyola. I don't recall that woman, working hard with me for 4 years to earn something as esteemed as that. I was so honored to wear an African stole like my brother did when he graduated, and like I'm sure both of my parents did when they graduated. So for this white woman to insert herself into that situation and have the audacity to even think that her opinion about my African stole even remotely mattered goes to show you the privilege that she has. For her to have the ability or the wherewithal to just say, I'm gonna comment on this little Black girl's post and I'm gonna let her know how I feel. If I did something like that, if one of you did something like that, it would be the end of the world. We hold ourselves accountable, unlike some of our peers who exert their privilege as a means to just say whatever they please. So that was the most recent form of racism that I experienced. And it was unfortunate that it happened, but perfect timing, I would say, for this conversation. But that just goes to show you how microaggressions or micro forms of racism are so prevalent and real today. I swear, it's so annoying. But people don't understand. It's like a mosquito bite. I actually taught a diversity and inclusion training for the new class of people in my program. And we showed this video that microaggressions are like mosquito bites. Every time somebody says, ooh, can I touch your hair? Oh, how does your hair do that? Or, oh, wow, you look so nice today. Did you just making certain comments, or your hair looks really nice when it's straight. Stuff like that, it starts to eat away at a person. And when they're finally fed up, people will be surprised and say, well, why are they reacting like that? Well, some people get bit by mosquitoes more often than others, okay? So those things start to add up. Yes, this lady just made a small comment on Instagram, but time after time after time of having to prove yourself just because you're a Black woman is so exhausting. It's like, I have what I have and I have earned what I have earned because of how hard I work, not because I'm a Black person who received handouts. I try so hard to prove that. And I feel like we're always trying to prove our worth, saying, well, I got here because I deserve it, not because of affirmative action. It's because I'm actually a talented person who's worked their behind off to get here, so I'm getting a little heated, but yes, I've experienced racism quite recently.
Thank you. And yes, go ahead, Dom.
Okay, so I guess there were like two events, and they were definitely when I was in college. When you're a little kid, you're surrounded by microaggressions and you don't even know it, especially at a predominantly white school. My whole school district was predominantly white. And I remember in kindergarten, a girl was like, yeah, my family doesn't believe in mixed races. And my whole life, I thought she said graces, but she said mixed races. And so that was something that it took me a long time to understand. And I was like, Mom, I don't remember it saying mixed graces in the Bible. Can you not say grace different ways when you eat dinner? But my mom didn't know what I meant either. And it took me a really long time and a lot of therapy to realize she was saying that her family didn't believe in mixed races because of the Bible. And so that's a whole nother thing, living in the Bible Belt. But when I was an undergrad, there was an incident. It was Halloween. And I don't know if KERRI and Sydney, y'all remember this, but somebody came on our porch and just broke all the stuff that we had on our porch at our apartment on campus. And so, you know, we had the amnesty policy, you know, even if you've been drinking, you're allowed to call public safety and they're going to come. They won't report anything. They'll just like take a record of what happened. And, you know, it's like they broke other people's stuff. And we're like, well, we should file a police report just in case it was somebody that didn't live on campus. And the first thing the lady did, it was me and all my roommates were white at this time. It was me and my roommate. We're sitting outside on the porch waiting for her to come. And she was super aggressive towards us and we didn't know why. She's like, have you been drinking? And we're like, does it matter? We're here to report that someone came on our porch on our property, broke our stuff. And she's like, you're being very aggressive, ma'am. And at this point, I just stopped talking. I was like, what is happening? And this is campus police. Like, ma'am, what are you doing? And so she was like, you're only acting this way because I'm a white person in uniform. I said, hold up. I said, I called you because someone broke something on my property. And at this point, my friend inside had called like the RA on duty. And she's like, I don't know what's going on, but this lady cop's being real hostile towards my roommate and my two roommates outside. And at that point, I was so scared. But when she said that, not the RA on duty, but the person over all the RAs, I can't remember what they're called. What is it?
Area coordinator. The
area coordinator was there, and she said, Dom, go inside. And I don't know what she said, but they called like the head of campus security, and she resigned that night within the hour for what she said to me. And I think that was the first time I truly experienced real racism. Like, I just sat in the living room and cried, I think for like 3 hours. I said, what if my friend Amy had not been out there? What would have happened? And I'm like, this is a campus police, or a place I probably have felt the most comfortable in my entire life. I would go running by myself at 10 o'clock at night up and down the hill. I didn't care. And I never saw campus security as a threat, but I never saw them the same ever again, right? And then like the other time, Sunny and I had just gotten married and we just came back from our honeymoon. And we're like, oh, we're going up, like so great. And our friend had a baby, and the baby, we didn't vibe. So his friend kept trying to pass me this baby. And I'm like, the baby doesn't like me, huh? And then he goes, oh, maybe it's because of your hair. And I was like, this is problematic. Don't say that. And then everyone gets quiet, it's at a birthday party. And then he goes, it's probably because of your dark skin. And I was like, hold up. And I know at that point everyone had been drinking, and I was just like taken aback. And like some of his friends, like they chuckled a little bit, and then someone like, you don't say that, babies can't be racist, like why would you even say that? But like at that point, my husband, because we had just been married, and we'd been dating for like 2 years at that point, we just got married, he didn't know what to say. He's like, are you ready to leave? And that was like the first real fight we ever had, because I was like, how could you not defend me? He's like, I've never been in that position to know what to say. And like, I went and stayed at a hotel for a couple of days because I was like reevaluating, like when we have children, you're going to have to know what to say. You're going to have to step up and become that person, even if you've never been in that place before. And I already have a running list now because of that situation of people my children will never see. So I don't want them to ever limit my children based on what they look like, or limit what they can achieve, or put little things in my kids' heads that they can't be this great, incredible person. And like, I never thought I would have to do that because his family is so inclusive and so inviting and so diverse. To have a friend of a friend say something like that. And I'm like, but this friend of a friend will be around my kids. And I'm like, we're gonna have to move, we gotta go, right? And that's something that like completely altered those two events, and even that event in childhood, because obviously I never forgot it, they completely changed me as a person. Mm-hmm. And like, that's something I know my white friends, they don't ever think about, right? He never had to think about it as my husband, and we dated interracially in Mobile, Alabama, right? But it's never something we really overtly and face on face ever had to go through together. And it really changed me, and it changed us.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And then we have one final question. And I just want, each person just to answer this, whatever order you feel comfortable in. What is the most important thing you feel needs to happen going forward?
Well, moving forward, I really believe that Black women really do need to get more support. And this is just across, socioeconomical, political. I believe that we have been pushed down to the bottom of the totem pole across everything, and we don't get the credit that we deserve, and we see it firsthand with Breonna Taylor's case. I believe that her conversation is now being put on the back burner and it's not being talked about as much as it should be. And we see the clear distinction of support that Black women are just so naturally inclined to support the Black man, but when we need the support, we're not given the same. So I believe that moving forward, we really have to make sure that we're valuing Black women and lifting them up as much as possible, supporting their businesses, supporting their work. I believe that lifting up Black women will lift up our community. And until we have those real honest conversations about the support for Black women, I don't think we're going to move forward in the best possible way.
Awesome, thank you. Whoever wants to go next, go ahead, Mignon.
Next, I would say the most important thing that we need to do moving forward is to educate ourselves and not necessarily outsource to other people to educate us, but really truly do our own research. And especially as Black people, we need to know more about ourselves. As I said, throughout history class, ever since we were younger, they weren't telling us the full story. The only thing that we were kind of taught was, oh, you know, slavery happened in the country. And then we had the civil rights movement. And then it's all, you know, rainbows and sunshine now, when that's not necessarily the case. They didn't tell us about our great, strong, and powerful history that was in the past. They didn't teach us about the Moors or about Haiti and how it's the only Black independent nation, how they fought and revolted and got their own freedom. They don't teach us that. They have purposely left out some of our great aspects of our history. We were not just slaves in America. There's years and centuries of history that happened before we even stepped foot on American soil. And we've accomplished such great things once we got here. We need to educate ourselves on how great and powerful we are. That's the only way we can move forward, is once we acknowledge our worth, once we acknowledge how powerful we are and how deserving we are of so much more, then we'll begin. I mean, we're already demanding what we want now, but then we will continue to bolster ourselves and demand more for ourselves. You know, we have to educate ourselves. They kept us in the shadows and ignorant and unknowing of our history for so long as a means of power, as a power tactic. We have to unleash our minds, educate ourselves on our history if we want to move forward. We really need to empower ourselves. You know, we can look to white people to fix the wrongs that they've created, but we got to take matters into our own hands. You know, we're going to have to be how we get out of this rut, you know, and it's going to have to start with educating ourselves on our deep, rich history that they've refused to teach us for so long.
Thank you, Mignon. And whoever's next, who would like to go?
I honestly think more conversations and opportunities like this, I don't know about y'all, but I feel so much lighter, just kind of getting a lot of this off my chest. And I don't know how the people listening feel, if you can relate to this, but I think just more conversations, I think are necessary and I think really helpful.
Awesome, thank you.
I think for me, and I feel like I do this in my life all the time, we need to do more of action rather than words. But just like Dominique said, I love this conversation we just had. This was amazing. But, you know, we say we're going to do things, but we don't actually follow through and do it. And I mean, that can trickle down to voting. You're going to have people that are like, go out and vote. They might even like post it and, you know, encourage their friends to do it, but are they actually going to go and vote? And so, and it goes back to what Mignon said with educating yourself. You have to educate yourself on what you can do and those avenues that you can go on to make action. I think right now, I mean, ever since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and things like that, people are starting to get relaxed about it. Like I said, they're not as strong and head force as they were before. And I think that can't stop, because if we stop, they're definitely going to stop. They are not going to continue it if we don't continue to do what we have to do. And so I feel like that continuation of just, and it's going to get tiring, it's going to get aggravating, but we can't stop, you know? And I think when you look at every little bitty thing we talked about, between the mental health, between, you know, news and different things like that, we have to find new ways to reach people and reach those people that are not having these conversations, because how many people wake up on a Saturday morning to do this? It's not happening. So we have to find those ways to reach them at their level so that they can jump on board and we can all together get where we need to be. Because if we're not all together, it's not going to happen.
I love that, KAMRI. Thank you so much. And last but not least, go ahead, KERRI.
So I think the way we start is making sure that we have some sort of balance and standards of like what self-preservation is for ourselves. Audre Lorde said, like, caring for yourself is self-preservation. It's not indulgence. It's not something that you should be, it's something that you should really take in. And it's also an act of political warfare. And you have to think about like caring for yourself in the terms of like self-preservation and what that in turn will lead you to do in your future. If you're not caring for yourself, if you're not continuously putting the things back into yourself that you give so freely and lovingly to other people, then you need to like rethink that today, honestly. And then also be committed to educating ourselves, right? We've all touched on that today, and we touched that in a great way. But like, be so committed to educating yourself to understand that history is going to repeat itself. One thing that I like to always just remind people is just like when we talk about the Black vote and how powerful it is, I like to remind people that the Black vote has always been powerful. We just never knew, because when the Black vote was so powerful after Reconstruction period, that's when they started to question, like, oh wait, if y'all are gonna have voting rights and y'all are gonna, you know, use this power to elect Black leaders in your state, in your community, and some even went to DC to represent, right, in the Congress. And so I think that's the most important thing, like understanding the history of the Black vote, because it's always been powerful. It's always just been suppressed after they realized how powerful it was. And I think that is probably one of the most important things. And also really being committed to the work of anti-racism. I know that a lot of people are like discussing that and bringing that to the forefront, but it has been something that I've been trying to do within my personal life, not only within the Black community, but really in understanding with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, just understanding how we see other communities. If I can be frank with you, as Black Americans, it's always really been us for ourselves, right? Like everyone, you couldn't really depend on the Asian community, or you couldn't necessarily depend on the Hispanic community to really uplift the Black community, because we have always been at the bottom tier. But in order for us to process, in order for us to just honestly defeat anti-racist, like just be anti-racist as a whole, as a nation, then we have to get in the idea of like, how are we prejudiced within other communities as well? Because if those prejudices still live on as we interact with other communities, it's gonna like turn back into our own community. So that's what I'm really just trying to get to the point of saying, like, it's not necessarily doing it to, you know, it's not necessarily saying like you are being prejudiced in your own community at this point. It's like, now that we know what prejudices look like, and now that we know how to combat that, how can we go into other communities and combat the prejudices that we have for other communities? Because if we let that continue to grow in us for our own for other communities, it's gonna literally trickle down and come back into our community. So it's really like, and I know that a lot of times we want to make sure that we focus on Black lives. And so Black lives matter, and Black lives will always matter. But we need to make sure that, I don't know where I'm taking this, sorry, but we need to just make sure that we are like honing in on all the prejudices that we have to make sure it's not continuously reflected and like just coming back into our own community within ourselves.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, KERRI. Before we wrap up with closing remarks, I want to turn it over to Shades contributor, Michelle.
Hey, everyone. Actually, Shades publisher, I know it's been a long couple of hours, and I thank you, Sydney, so much. I'm also president of Exceptional Women in Publishing, which is the organization that produces Shades. And I just want to thank everyone, the participants today. We've had a great crowd. We had a lot of people register. I think the time difference might have thrown them off, but I want to thank everyone. I want to especially thank KAMRI, Madison, MIGNON, KERRI, Dominique. You ladies were great this morning. You offered so much insight. And I would be remiss in not acknowledging Sydney, who I just kind of threw this in her lap and she just ran with it. And also LYNDSEY ELLIS, who is, both of them are Shades contributing editors and writers, and Sydney is on the EWIP board of directors. And I just want to thank you because they just really, as I said, ran with this and put it together, and it's been great. And you can expect more of these discussions with different communities, us getting together. And if you have ideas and suggestions of how we should do that or topics you'd like to hear about, please email us at info@shadesmagazine@gmail.com. You can DM us at Instagram. We are shadesmagazine.ewip, EWIP. We are on Facebook under Shades Magazine, and also Twitter, Shades Magazine 1. So you can reach us on all those platforms. I just want to remind everyone, this was recorded today, and starting on Monday, you can view it and share. It will be on our on our website and also on our social media platforms. And I think that's all I had to say. I just want to, it's been great. I'm really excited about how everything went and honored to be in the presence of these women that, you know, they're our future, and they spoke so eloquently and with such knowledge, and I'm just really excited. And Sydney, LYNDSEY, thank you so much. So back to you, Sydney.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for putting everything together, the Eventbrite, the link. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I just want to close with the quote from Angela Davis, who says, "The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity in the machinery of oppression, but rather to identify and dismantle those structures which racism continues to be embedded." And with that being said, I want to thank you for everyone for participating, for your questions, for your comments, and for, of course, our lovely participants who are my friends. I'm so happy to call you all my friends, and I'm happy to keep having these conversations with you all. With that being said, please, everyone, be safe, be well, please wear a mask, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.